everybody, Invisiblekatana here with my review for Us. Of course, as the title says, there will be spoilers in this review, but they will be in the second half, so naturally I'll let you guys know when I'm going to get to the spoilers for the film. But right off the top, I'd say this was a really fun movie. Of course, it is Jordan Peele's second, in this, who knows how many horror movies he's going to end up making and stuff like that, thrillers and all that. But this is the second one, of course, after Get Out. Huge phenomenon of a movie. I enjoyed Get Out. I'm pretty sure I did. Yeah, I definitely did a review of that. But it was, for me, I was like, okay, I thought Get Out was okay. I didn't really love it like everyone else did. I saw it once and I was just like, I can never see it again and I'll be totally fine because I was just like, it was all right. I like Get Out more, or I like this more. Sorry, I like Us more than Get Out. And I think I liked it more because this was more of a horror movie compared to Get Out, which was without a doubt, like, you could say it's horror or whatever, but that was a psychological thriller, like, to the highest degree. Like, it even had, like, full-on mystery stuff going on. It was, like, a thriller mystery movie, with horror elements. And this, I would say, was much closer to a horror movie because you have, like, which they show from the trailer with these doppelgangers trying to kill these people. It is like a slasher flick in certain portions, especially because there are people that get killed off in the movie. There are moments where it's like, okay, this is without a doubt more horror-based, and it's, slasher, and there's elements that are in there which are like, okay, that's definitely something you see more from like a straight up slasher flick horror movie than you would see from, a psychological thriller. So I think I enjoyed it more for that because I like horror so much, and it is very different, even though, in the grand scheme of things, psychological thrillers tend to be under the umbrella of horror. But, Get Out wasn't a scary movie. It was just like a suspense movie. And this was definitely like, there are parts where it's like, oh crap, that's like really freaky or really creepy. And like, you don't really know how things are going to really work out. So I think that's why I like this one a bit more, because it was closer to just being like pure horror. And I like that element of it because it kind of, when it ramps up, it really ramps up. And it's not like, the anxiety of watching this movie compared to Get Out isn't necessarily like, what's happening or, learning the big reveal like in Get Out. In this one, it's just what's happening like exactly in that moment. Like, it's not mystery based. Some stuff, is mystery based, but it's like the anxiety of watching the film or just some of the crazier stuff is just straight up like, oh crap, someone may or may not live. And so that's, I think, why I enjoyed it a little bit more. It's just that pacing of it was a bit more intense, and so I liked it more for that. As a whole, I think, going down the line, I think people will ultimately say Get Out was better. I think Get Out wraps up a bit more, and obviously I'm going to mention Get Out because that's the only thing everyone's going to do, of course, is just be like, well, Get Out versus this movie because it's by the same person, and Get Out was like insanely famous. I would say, as a whole, Get Out probably wraps up better just because they literally answer every single question, and this one leaves things open-ended, and there's more like, not mystery elements, but there's more like out there elements where it's like, well, does that really make sense and stuff like that. But as you're watching it, you'll think about stuff here and there, but it's not enough to be like, well, that's just horrible. It'll, once you like start to get into it, it's like, well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense here and there. But I think it's less, as much as Get Out is, kind of a crazy movie, and I won't spoil that if you, just in case you haven't seen it. But even with the crazy stuff that goes on there, this movie takes it even further. I mean, it's literally clones, but then, they go into that element of it, and it's like, okay, that's somehow, with some of the things that happen are even less believable than the crazy stuff that happens in Get Out. So in that regard, I think some people prefer Get Out just for that element where you can be like, okay, it's really crazy, but there's a way where you can ground it and it makes 100%, it just makes sense 100% of the way. And in this film, it's like, okay, well, you kind of have to make some stuff up. Not 100% of the stuff makes 100% sense when you really, dive into it. But as an experience, I still enjoyed this one more. Like, even with those questions, like going into it and, watching other people's reviews just to see what other people thought about, like, the very end of the movie and some of the weird stuff that happens. And that was kind of the consensus. And I was like, yeah, it makes sense. Like, I still had a better experience personally with this one because I just thought Get Out, like I said, for me personally, I was just like, yeah, it was entertaining, but it just didn't do much for me, like, at all. Like, I just gotta be honest, like, it just never did anything for me, really. And so I just like this one way more. So that's like I said, my crazy, but I'm probably like one of the few people that would even remotely say that, but I just like this one way more. I would much rather watch this than Get Out. But I really enjoyed it. I liked the way it was handled. All the acting I thought was well done. Very funny. I thought this one may have actually had more comedy than Get Out, and I think that kind of lends to the psychological thriller element of it, where it was much calmer of a movie. And this movie, with it being like the slasher flick, everything was, amped up. Like the stuff like, well, is this going to work out for the heroes? that was amped up because it was more of a slasher flick in certain elements. And so, oddly enough, the comedy also was kind of amped up because things would happen where it was like, it wasn't, too over the top. And so it kind of worked, but it was just funny because it was like, all right, well, someone would probably try to do this, but it doesn't work out. So it's, it's done in a funnier way. And then that kind of lends to the creepiness of the situation where it's like, okay, you're kind of laughing about this, and then things start to get serious again. It's like, oh, that makes it even more serious because you were laughing like 2 seconds ago. But it's a great balance. It's like the perfect balance of that where, you were laughing like 2 seconds ago, but then it gets serious, and it's like, it doesn't feel like it's two totally separate things. Like they blend perfectly together. So I'm very happy about that. Like pretty much throughout the entire film, it's just like that where it's like, okay, funny horror, and it's not like back and forth through the whole movie or anything, but there are just scenes where that happens, and because it's so well done, it's like, okay, it blends. It makes perfect sense. Like it blends, and then it's like, okay, you've laughed, horror time, and then it freaks you out and it gets real crazy. So I love the way that was handled throughout the film. Like I said, all the actors I think did well, children and adults alike. So I really enjoyed that. I feel like there's not much else I can really say about the movie without, before I get into my spoiler stuff, but definitely enjoyable. There's some extra content in here that you won't expect, especially like when it gets to the end, there's some really crazy stuff that happens. But just in general, I'd say like maybe halfway through the movie, or not even halfway, like a bit before halfway, things start to kind of expand a little bit. And it's like, okay, well, you think it's kind of just like this, and then things start to evolve a little bit. And it's like, okay, you start to see some extra elements start to come into play in the film. It's like, okay, well, that's pretty exciting. How is that going to work out? Knowing that we're still fairly early in the movie, like things happen in the film where it's like, okay, this is kind of what you would feel like would happen at the end of a horror movie, where it seems like this would happen or that would happen. And so that almost allows for them to do like different types of stories, different types of horror stories within one film. And I think that it ultimately all comes together fairly well. So I certainly enjoyed that too, because I was like, okay, this happens, and that would normally be like a whole movie, and it's just like the first act or something like that. It's just like right in the middle, or it's like, this 4-minute scene is what most horror movies would probably expand to be like half the movie, or little stuff like that. It's like, okay, that's cool. They like, shoot through that. It was kind of like when you watch a TV show and you're like, man, I hope they don't do this for like 5 episodes. And it's like, oh, they did it all in one. It's that sort of element watching this movie where you think this is going to last for a super long time. And you're like, all right, how long is this going to be drawn on? Even though it's entertaining, it's more entertaining because it's like, oh, it ended. And then you go to something brand new. And it's like, all right, well, that makes it even more entertaining because I was expecting this to happen for, twice as long, 3 times as long. And then it's like, nope, we're done with that. And we're on to the next phase of, this crazy adventure. So I actually really love the movie for that because, stuff just happens at a different rate than I was anticipating. So that's probably one of my favorite elements of it. So I definitely recommend it for that. If you're like going into it where you're like, okay, I expect this, this, and this. The movie, much like Get Out, the movie does throw hints your way like throughout the film where it's like, oh, look at this random thing, and here's this thing in the background, or this thing, like right in your face. And so stuff comes into play that you are shown right off the top. Some stuff comes into play that's like slightly referenced. Some stuff comes into play that you probably just didn't even realize was there to to begin with, like something in the background, or music playing, or anything random. So it's just like with Get Out. There's stuff to see in this movie where it's like, oh, I saw that, I noticed this thing, I noticed that thing. But you go back and you watch it again, odds are you didn't notice every single thing that played out, every little reference that was there, you probably didn't get. So I think that's cool. Is just like with Get Out, it's done in this movie as well. It's just it's so fast paced. I feel like it's almost even harder to kind of put some of the stuff together because you're more worried about like, well, crap, are these people gonna live? Are these people gonna die? And with Get Out, it was much slower. Like you knew it was gonna focus on like basically this one character trying to get out of this weird situation. As in this case, it's a family, so it's like, is everybody gonna live in the family? Like you don't really know, so you're kind of worried the whole time. So I feel like it gives you a bit less of a chance to be like, oh, there's this reference, there's that reference. Some stuff is super obvious, but with there being more characters in this movie, I feel like you might miss more than you would have in Get Out because that's a much slower paced film, and this is like, crap, they're being chased or something crazy is about to happen or something crazy just happened, so you might miss some of the little references. So I definitely enjoyed it for that. But all in all, I'd say it was a good movie. I would definitely recommend it. Of course, for anyone who hasn't seen the movie, I'm about to get into spoilers, so go check it out. I think it's good. If anyone's going to compare it, like I said, that's going to be the big thing because, Get Out was so huge. That's kind of up to everyone else. Like I said, I enjoyed this movie more than I enjoy Get Out, but I'm probably like the only person that would say that because I didn't like Get Out that much to begin with. I was like, I thought it was fun, and then it was just like whatever. Like it just didn't hit me like it did everybody else. I was like, yeah, great commentary on society and this and that. Great movie without a doubt. Like there's nothing about it where it's like I just don't think it's that good. It's like no, it was incredibly well done. For me personally, it was just like, yep, it was good, and that was it. So that's like my super personal opinion, which is probably different from everybody else. But I like this one a lot more, just because of the element of like it's more horror based, and I love horror, so I like this one more than Get Out. Just my crazy opinion, which I'm sure no one will agree with. But getting into spoilers, so official spoiler warning. If you haven't seen the movie, go check it out. Come back to this. Let me know what you think about it. But going right into spoilers, of course, the main thing to talk about naturally is the ultimate, twist ending at the end of this film. And I thought it was cool. I thought it was cool. I thought it was crazy. And that's also one of the elements that leads to why this movie, as like a written film, isn't as good as Get Out, because there's so many questions where it's just like, all right, well, how does this make sense? How does that make sense? One of the big things, of course, is the weird element of like, okay, well, we'll go with Red, so Red, and then the regular version of Lupita Nyong'o. So we find out, at the end of the movie that when this little girl actually went into the crazy house of mirrors, it cuts because she saw this clone of herself and it freaked her out, and so she takes off. And we find out at the end of the movie that the girl that takes off was actually the clone. Lupita Nyong'o, as a young child, the actual girl, was choked and knocked unconscious, and then she was basically handcuffed, and then that was all there was to it. So that ends up happening, and then you have Red, the original, like actual Red. She goes off and she grows up to be like this normal person, while Lupita Nyong'o's character ends up being, basically they switch places, and they end up like one ends up growing and the other ends up reverting. And I thought that was actually pretty cool. And we also this was something, because I was glad I watched other videos before I did this, because I wanted to hear what other people thought about like the ending. And people pointed out the reason that she spoke the way that she did was because she was choked as a kid, and like I guess the clones have like super strength, which kind of makes sense, because you have like Abraham, who is like the Red of the husband. He's able to like push the door in versus the actual guy, and it's like it's technically the same person, but one has like way more strength. So it's that weird element of the characters where they have more strength, and they're not bound by certain mental limits. And so when she chokes the girl as a kid, that's why she speaks like that as an adult, because her larynx is like crushed and it didn't heal properly, so she can't really speak 100%. A big thing that was brought up in like one of the first reviews I saw was like, why didn't she just say, you choked me out and took my place? Like that could have been done. Granted, that was obviously written that way solely for the fact that they didn't want to, give away the big reveal in the beginning of the movie. So, that's one of the little things. It was like, okay, you can do that. That allows for the rest of the movie to happen without the big twist. But then you get to the ending, and it's like, okay, well, a part of it makes sense, and then another part was like, okay, I guess as the person who was originally the clone, she repressed the fact that she was the one that did that. And it was like, it kind of makes sense. It kind of doesn't to me, because it's like, it makes sense in the regard of she would want to block that out so that she could become basically, more human. That's basically how she learned how to speak, was just being around people. So that was why she became quiet. It wasn't that she, had this trauma, which makes perfect sense that would happen. But it actually ended up being that she didn't know how to speak. So she had to hear people talk a bunch until she was able to, actually have it, in her head to be like, oh yeah, this is how you talk. These are words, pretty much. So that was actually kind of cool. And then you have, the character who's, this young girl who's stuck underground, and she's barely even able to speak. And then there's no one to speak to anymore. So I thought that was actually kind of cool. And then they get to certain elements where it's like, okay, well, the people underground mimic the people up top. And then they have this weird thing, and they kind of explain this in the movie, where Lupita Nyong'o's characters are like specially linked. Like it's this really weird thing where they're linked way more than anybody else, because they have it where the clone is doing the ballet dance and everything, but Lupita Nyong'o, like the original girl, she still ends up dancing. And I was like, okay, well, that's very interesting. So they do explain that part where it's like they're linked in a very special way, where the girl up top, who was the clone, is actually doing stuff, on her own. So it was pretty interesting. And then, it was just weird. It's one of those weird leaps where it's like, well, how does that happen? It just happened. Like it just it just went that way. That's just what it was. Then of course there's the natural thing that I think everyone pretty much brought up was like, how did they survive so long? You can't. You literally just can't. Like you can't. You know, everyone's like, well, they ate rabbits. Did they have enough rabbits? Honestly, it doesn't matter because a weird random fact that I know is you can't live off a rabbit because they don't have fat like at all. So you literally can't survive without, you know, eating. You literally cannot survive only eating a rabbit because they don't have fat at all in their body, or it's like so small that it doesn't affect us as human beings. And you actually have to have like some amount of fat to survive. So they could not survive in any way, shape, or form only on rabbit. So that's like a really random thing that I just happened to know, and I was like, I was just watching the movie and it was kind of funny to me. It was like, I know they're eating rabbits, but I happen to know thanks to Survivor Man, that doesn't work. And it was just a weird thing where I was like, you can't do that in real life. And it was just funny. But it was, you know, it's one of those weird things where you have to take a few leaps of faith with this movie compared to Get Out, where it's like, okay, weird science stuff, but it's like, all right, yeah, you put this brain here and you do this and you do that, you know, sci-fi, and it works. And in this case, the sci-fi doesn't work as well, because then it's like, well, they're tethered and they do what the original people do, and then somehow they broke free of that just at random because you have the original girl who somehow bonded with her clone who was doing stuff, but she ended up mimicking her clone, and so that somehow allowed her to break all the actual clones free from the other people. Weird stuff like that, like, you know, just how does that even make sense? So, you know, there's some elements there where it's just like, that just doesn't work, but still interesting. Definitely a crazy ending for it. They did some great hints throughout the movie. My favorite part was, and of course they do it at the end where the boy realizes that something's off with his mom, and he realizes like, oh, she's different. You know, he realizes that she's actually, you know, kind of like them. And they have that in the beginning when she kills the twin, the way she's breathing, and he sees her like that. At first I was like, oh, he's freaking out because he just saw her, you know, he sees his mom actually kill one of the clones. And then I was like, she's breathing kind of funny. That looks weird. And it was her like almost regressing back to what she originally was. And I was like, I like that. I thought that was a cool little clue. And then, of course, when she kills the clone, I thought it was just, you know, they talk about the weird soul thing and how they're like kind of tethered and stuff. I thought it was almost like if you kill your clone, you know, those two sides, you know, officially meld into you. There's clones. So I was just making up a bunch of crap like, well, if you kill your clone, then that crazy part of them almost goes back to you, or some weird stuff like that. That's what I was doing in my head at the time. And then it just made sense. I was like, oh, she's a clone. That's why she was just being crazy and laughing and stuff like that. Parts of her were starting to remember, and then she officially remembers at the end. So it was like, okay, interesting little twist there. And like I said, you have the girl who was knocked out. Technically, she could have just said that in the very beginning, like, you know, you're the clone, and you know that. Which I oddly enough, I think that could have worked. I think that would have been very interesting if they did that like right off the top. How would that movie have played out? Like if she was just like, you did this to me, and like you trapped me, you know, underground forever. And it's just like this really interesting thing, which she wouldn't have been. She totally could have made her way out of it. Like the time that she was in there, they escaped at some point. She could have just left. Just saying, that's another random thing. It's like, well, I mean, this girl knows she's not tethered and stuff like that, except for that dancing sequence. But she could have just left. She could have found her way out if she tried. Just saying. But still enjoyed the movie. You know, like I said, like that's why I say like it's definitely personal preference, because this movie doesn't wrap up nearly as well as Get Out does with all the answers, and it's like this factual. Us is just kind of like, wide open. This doesn't really make 100% sense. That doesn't really work, you know, a lot of ways. And, you know, there's the weird thing with the kids being born and they have the exact same kids and stuff like that. And once again, you know, with the weird tether stuff that they have, it's just like, you know, there you go. Like, that's just how it works. So it's interesting, it's interesting to see how that kind of plays out and how it doesn't really make sense 100%, but just going through it, it's still really fun. So that's the big, interesting, weird thing, about the end of the movie is that crazy twist and stuff, and the little clues that they give you throughout the movie, which I thought was cool. And they do like the Hands Across America stuff, which I could tell as soon as I couldn't tell when they first showed the guy. It was the dude who was there who had like the Jeremiah 11:11 thing. He was standing there. He was waiting for other people to join him, and I didn't realize that at first. And I was like, oh, that's why he was standing. He was like the first person to like kind of get out there, and he was the first person to kill like his original. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. And that's why he was there in the beginning of the movie, just like T-posing. It was weird. He was waiting for everyone else to come along and join him in the little chain link. So I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. But I like the way the movie played out. I like the fact that there were other doppelgangers. That was what I mentioned as far as my spoiler free section. That I loved because they go through the portion of them in the house and then they get out of the house within like 10 minutes or something. And I was like, oh, going through the movie, I thought that was kind of the whole movie was them fighting against their doppelgangers in the house pretty much. And then that doesn't end up being the case. Like they do that, they kill one of them off, really early on, and then it's like, all right, well, we're out of here. And then they go to their friend's house and we see them get killed off like as soon as they show up, and the twins just get killed off, and then the husband gets killed, and then the wife gets stabbed, but then she dies a little bit later. And I was like, okay, well, that's cool. That means there are other doppelgangers. I just assumed, from the trailer, I thought it was the main family's doppelgangers. They went to their friends like, oh crap, we have doppelgangers, and normal horror movie stuff. You go to your friends and then your friends get killed off, and it's like, that sucks, but we're still alive. That's what I thought was going to happen. I thought the clones killed their friends, and it was like, nope, everyone has doppelgangers. So I was like, that's actually pretty sweet. So I thought that was actually really entertaining because I just assumed it was only that family had clones. They just killed, other people throughout the film. So I thought that was an interesting little twist that I wasn't anticipating, where everyone else had clones. And then it's like, well, if they had clones and we have clones, how many are out there? And then they watch TV and it's like, it's actually happening all over the place. So I thought that was a cool little jump for the movie. And then, things just keep going as they get back to the beach, and then the kid gets kidnapped. And then, we see them go into at least Lupita Nyong'o's character go into the underground facility. So I thought that was really cool. I like the way it was handled, whereas like, some of the segments of this movie are basically, full versions of movies. Like if they stayed in the house, that, there are 100 million horror movies that are strictly that movie. And it's like, that's a full hour and a half. They're running around the house trying to survive. And that was like, that was their first interaction. It was like 15 minutes. One of the villains does get killed off on the boat. And then the rest of the family, tries to track them down later throughout the film as they're, either going to their friend's house, fighting in the boat, fighting the clones, dealing with the car where the daughter, slams on the brakes and her clone flies into the trees and stuff. The kid kills his clone because his clone actually mimics him still. And I thought that was interesting. Like he was the one that mimicked him the most still. And I think it's because he was so young, he didn't break free of that element. So he liked to mimic him most. And I think that's what that was meant to be. And I was like, well, that's kind of cool because the other ones were able to be brought out of it. But because he was still so young, he still liked to mimic his original. And so that's why the kid, he realized, he was like, okay, well, hey, check it out. And then he backs up and his clone does the same thing because he just liked to mimic him. I was like, that's actually kind of cool. And once again, making that up in my head because that's not specifically explained, but that's kind of how I looked at it in the movie, is because he was still so young compared to the other characters. He liked to do, he was still in that younger stage where, he was that character. And that also kind of says the same for the kid himself, who's technically born of the clone. We see that he doesn't talk much, and that's kind of a clone element, which I think was kind of meant to be there because the daughter had already grown up a little bit, but the boy was, younger, so he still had like that weird clone kind of DNA thing going. So I thought that was interesting. Once again, making it up in my own head, but I feel like that's kind of the point of this movie, not giving us all the answers. But really enjoyed it. Crazy twist ending. Some stuff doesn't make sense. Some stuff does. All in all, I still like this more than Get Out. So that's just my super insane opinion that I don't think anyone will agree with me on. But that's my opinion on it. We'd love to know what you guys thought about this film. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. Let me know your favorite parts about it, your least favorite parts about it. I would love to know what answers you kind of made up for the film since we didn't get all the answers. Of course, the big comparison. Which would you say you prefer to see? Would you like to see Get Out, or would you rather see Us? For me, just from the element of watching it, I just preferred Us. I felt it was faster paced, but I still had all that same intrigue as I did with Get Out, but it was still more entertaining to watch as I had that intrigue. It was like, okay, well, what's happening here? What's going to happen next? But while I had those questions, crazy stuff was going on. So ultimately, that's why I like Us a bit more than I like Get Out. But we'd love to know which one you guys prefer and, what you guys thought about this movie as a whole. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.